Today's episode is brought to you by LaRosse Media. They make professional videos to fit any budget, so next time you need a commercial, promo, or corporate video, think LaRosse. Check them out at larossemedia.com. Hello and welcome to the Stinking Albatross Podcast. My name is Alyssa Globe, and I'm here once again with my partner in crime in person, Scott Hayward.
Hi, Alyssa. How's your week been? Together?
Good, Scott.
Yeah.
How's yours?
Yeah, we're on vacation here. My wife, family, and I here in Calgary, and once again, we're staying with Alyssa and her family. So we've had a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been good times. Of course,
went to the zoo.
We did.
That was exciting.
Sometimes I couldn't tell where you were.
Yeah, because I'm with the animals.
Yeah.
Have my own cage.
You should. We were just talking about
the guy who spent 14 grand to turn into a dog.
So we have a guest. We're going to bring him in on this conversation. We have a guest as part of our summer speaker series, Kelden Formosa. Kelden, have you heard about this guy who spent 14 grand to turn into a dog and then his wife or somebody took him out for a walk? Did you see that?
I'm hearing about it now for the first time.
Breaking news here on the Stinking Albatross Podcast.
Not great news.
Because I asked Scott and Oriana last night as a hypothetical, would they still be friends with someone who on occasion did role play as a dog? And then it just turned into this long conversation. But
I think it depends a lot on the amount spent on the role play. 14 grand.
Yeah.
That's a commitment. It's a commitment.
Yeah. Well, Kelden, thank you for coming on. Kelden is a teacher in Calgary. He has his bachelor's degree from the University of Ottawa, got his master's at Notre Dame, and he's contributed to America Magazine, True North, The Hub most specifically and regularly. And so we're really happy you could join us, Kelden.
Thank you for having me.
You just moved from British Columbia to Alberta, from Vancouver, right? Specifically to Calgary.
Yeah.
And how did you find the move? Did you go to Stampede? Have you ever gone to Stampede before? Tell us what your general thoughts are on the move, the interprovincial move.
Well, I'm a sucker for natural beauty. So a few years ago when I had the opportunity to move to BC, that was wonderful. And then I kind of committed to myself that I don't think I would go back east of Calgary because I need to be within range of mountains. I grew up in Toronto. And it's a beautiful place here. It's the different, what I'm trying to get used to is in BC, you often feel like you're kind of embraced by all the big trees, you're kind of under them. Whereas here you're kind of on the open prairie all of the time and you've got this kind of big sky and these incredible sunsets. But by and large, good move. I think I'm not the only one doing it, much to the chagrin of other Calgarians, I think to some extent. I think there is, the provincial, I thought it was funny, the provincial government put out there, Alberta is calling advertising campaign the same day I was driving from Vancouver. And I was just of course, I think a lot of Albertans are like, all these people coming in here taking our, so I don't know. I hate to be involved personally in those troubles.
Hey. I'm involved in that too, but I think the Conservatives would appreciate our contribution.
I was going to say, you too might be Jason Kenney's poster children for the campaign. Do you miss the 401 traffic at all from the GTA?
I haven't lived in Toronto since I was in high school, right? I went to university in Ottawa, and I go back every now and again, and driving on the 401 at Christmas break with my family is always 16 lanes, what is this? Especially compared to Vancouver, where I was used to okay, we're going 30 on a road that's basically one lane, but I don't miss the 401 traffic.
Yeah, you definitely get desensitized. I lived in Toronto for most of my young adult life, basically my entire 20s. And when you're in it, you don't realize how bad it is until you come back later and you're like, this is truly the worst thing I've ever experienced.
And it's only going in one direction.
Yeah.
Although I should say, I love Toronto. Every time I go back for Christmas, I just walk around. I don't know. I think it's great. I'm glad to go there for the
small doses.
3 to 5 weeks that I go every year to be with my folks.
Yeah. So you moved from Vancouver to Calgary, and you're a teacher. You've been a teacher in Vancouver. The school choice in Alberta is unmatched, I think, across the country. So we definitely understand why you did that. Now, I just want to talk about one of the articles you wrote specifically in America Magazine. And in there, you talk a little bit about growing up in your personal journey towards the pro-life movement and specifically Catholicism. And in our we're a non-religious organization. We don't really talk about like dogmatic principles of religion on our podcast or anything, but I thought this was an interesting intro because you talk about, growing up in sort of a chaotic family where there was drug and alcohol issues and finding emotional refuge in Catholicism. And then you talk later about kind of leading your pro-life club in college. Did these things go hand in hand, or do you think that if you didn't have if you didn't find this emotional refuge in Catholicism, you still would have been as actively involved in the pro-life movement, or kind of what has been the connection there?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, I grew up in a chaotic family, I think in the sense that a lot of people did, right? Like, I think it would be a surprise, I can't think of one person I know, like in my kind of friend group, who isn't in some way touched by kind of drug or alcohol abuse, in their kind of immediate to extended family, right? So, I don't want to say that, it was like I was treated terribly or anything. Like, I had a good childhood. But I do think that like the vision that was presented to me as I got older, growing up Catholic, and just kind of looking around at, I don't know, the chaos of family life for a lot of people, myself included, but also just kind of generally, like, divorce, separation, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, all that sort of thing. And then kind of comparing that to what I think I call in the article, like a rose-colored vision of kind of the pre-Vatican II kind of 1950s Catholicism, when things seem more stable. I don't know if that's 100% true, but I think in certain ways that kind of like image appealed to me. And yeah, so I mean, and I think that was one feeling that I think prompted me to kind of internalize my Catholicism. I was being raised Catholic, but I think it takes a lot to kind of internalize it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the other piece, I mean, there were other things going on too, kind of an intellectual and a spiritual journey, but I think there's certainly kind of an emotional piece of like, these people really seem to have it together, right? Like these people, more or less, they seem to have it together. And I think like my pro-life convictions come out of that, right? Because in a sense, like I think I looked at the church as, oh, the teachings here made sense on life. And then I also looked at, for all that kind of like, craziness and chaos, I am grateful for the fact that my family was Catholic, right? Like that, when a child comes in out of wedlock, that child's welcomed, right? And that like life is generally seen as kind of like a blessing, rather than, a massive burden, even though in certain ways, it just kind of practically speaking was and is. So I think, I don't know. I think as I have gotten a little bit older, I've complicated that picture of kind of what an ideal kind of family life looks like. But I think in ways that ultimately reflect kind of, what I believe as a Catholic, and also kind of what I've come to believe as a pro-lifer, separate from kind of my religious convictions.
Yeah, and it's also interesting because in some of the articles that you've written, most particularly for America Magazine, you reference that you talk about being gay in these articles and how that has had an effect on kind of shaping your pro-life views. I suppose, why do you think that this is typically, and I'm not saying this is exactly, but typically we think of this to be a rare view, someone who is, not straight, but is deeply pro-life. Why do you think that stereotype, if it is a stereotype, is rare? And in your opinion, like, why do we see more kind of rainbow flags, for example, at pro-abortion rallies than the other way around?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think there's a few things going on. Like, well, I'll set out kind of, I think the reason that people have that concern, and then why maybe I've come to dissent from it a little bit, is, in a sense, since the 1960s, there's kind of been the sexual revolution. And what's come out of that is a whole variety of different things, right? Like you've got kind of birth control, the pill, you've got legalized abortion. And then you also have kind of a greater acceptance of, well, you have like no-fault divorce, you've got differing rates of kind of family breakdown, you've got women kind of moving into the workforce a lot more. And then you also have a lot more like kind of gay liberation, right? And an acceptance of different kind of forms of relationship and family life. And I think there are kind of connections between those things, without a doubt. Like historically, it makes sense that there's connections. But I think that we kind of sometimes put them all into the same box and say, oh, these are all kind of the same thing. When, as I've gotten older, I've kind of found that I think that there is actually distinctions between them. And I think we need to be more thoughtful in the pro-life movement about kind of parsing out the distinctions such that I don't think that abortion equals gay marriage or gay marriage equals abortion. In fact, I actually think in certain ways, kind of gay liberation and kind of the ability for gay people to live their kind of lives authentically and fully fits in well with kind of a pro-life view. But, I think a lot of people look at everything that's happened since the 60s and they say, this is crazy. It's all bad, right? And I think, I'm sympathetic to that. I can understand why they think that, especially with, just, how sad and how tragic kind of the state of abortion is in, the modern West. But I think the other piece is just that, as these kind of issues became more and more kind of the part of a specific religion, and specifically Christianity and evangelical and kind of Catholic versions of Christianity, are very prominent in the pro-life movement, that it became that all these issues were kind of tied together even more so kind of by those dogmas and kind of those teachings. And the sort of people who would have, been opposed to gay marriage were also the people who were opposed to abortion. And they, and I think of this in Canada, frankly, and this is maybe critical, but like campaign life. Like I even remember when I was younger, a teenager, like I think at church one day, my parents were signing an anti-gay marriage petition, right, at the end of the service. And I think that's since changed and their views have kind of like shifted over time. But, it occurred to me kind of strange that it was like campaign life is focused on gay marriage when their name is campaign life, right? Like, and that those don't necessarily need to be the case. But I think for contingent reasons and also just kind of like, ways that kind of make sense, just if you think about historical development, those have been paired up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, both of us used to work at Campaign Life, and I think that was one of our main criticisms is that, like, he who does everything does nothing, and they feel like they have to combat every single moral issue that they believe to be, immoral. It was so even recently, like, they talked a lot about COVID issues and, lots of school board stuff and whatever, and our organization right now is specific on life issues, but we will broaden that horizon on our podcast and talk about some of this stuff because it is sort of intertwined, and we've talked a lot about like gender ideology. We had a transgendered individual on our podcast a couple weeks ago, which was really cool, and kind of hearing that perspective because of the gender ideology discussion happening in New Brunswick. So I think it's very important to have that specific goal and have a very specific focus, because if you don't, then you're not able to accomplish anything or move the yardsticks forward or anything. And that's kind of what I
like. My thing about it is that you take a name like Campaign Life Coalition, for example, right? Like you're campaigning, so you should be focused on campaigns. You're focused on the life issues, which I think we can all agree is abortion and assisted suicide in this country. And you're trying to build a coalition. And when I worked there, I didn't really see those three things really being all that prominent. Good people work at Campaign Life Coalition. I'm not trying to denigrate the organization. Like Alyssa said, there's a reason why we left. We just disagreed on a lot of the methodology to attain the same goal, which is to basically reduce abortions as much as humanly possible in this country, as well as assisted suicide rates. But because Canada is such a state that it's one of only 2 countries in the world where there is no law whatsoever on abortion. You can have an abortion for whatever reason you want, so as long as you can find someone to provide it to you. And we're seeing that more and more the case, these late-term abortions for very spurious reasons, especially in a province like Quebec, compared to the rest of the world that has some sort of legal restriction. It's almost like beggars can't be choosers. So my big thing when I worked there was, well, don't we want to build a pro-life coalition that is as broad and as winning as possible? And frankly, when you talk about some of these other moral issues, yes, like you're gonna, that Venn diagram for a lot of people is going to be almost a perfect circle, but it's not a perfect circle for everyone out there. So, for example, I'm sure there are issues that CLC supports and campaigns on that you, Kelden, would not support. But I, for example, wouldn't want you to not be in our organization right now that's focused on reducing the abortion and the assisted suicide rates in this country by as much as possible, as quickly as possible. A, because I think that you should be part of our coalition. I think everyone should be part of our coalition who wants those things. And B, we're not in a situation to be all that picky. So I find it kind of I don't know, hypocritical is the right word, but odd at the very least.
You guys
Yeah.
are so concise in your in your things. I'll be honest, when I wrote the article, and I gave a lot of thought before I wrote it, like it took me, I think I wrote it around kind of October, and then it was published in January in time for the US kind of March for Life. And I had been thinking about it for months beforehand. And my audience really was twofold. One, I wanted to speak to people who are inside the pro-life movement, often coming from a Catholic background and often, or kind of an evangelical Christian background, and kind of have a more traditional sexual ethic, is very skeptical of gay rights and gay relationships. And I wanted to speak to them and say, these things can be parsed out. And if we look at them carefully, we can find areas where we agree and areas where, pro-life and gay liberation actually kind of fit well with one another. And then my other audience, frankly, was gay people, and frankly, more progressive minded people for whom gay rights and gay liberation are kind of central to their moral outlook. Because I think that that's really something that's prominent in our time, where people think that that is kind of a central moral issue. And, I think not wrong, like they're not wrong. Like I think it is an important moral issue. But I think that sometimes they kind of look at institutions that are opposed to certain forms of gay liberation, and then based on that, they discount everything else those organizations have to say, such that you end up in a state where somebody says, oh, well, the Catholic Church or the Christian Church, broadly is wrong about gay marriage, so they must be wrong about abortion, or they're wrong about this, so they must be wrong about that. And I was trying to kind of say that, these things can be parsed out, and there's actually room, not in the middle for like compromise so much as there is room where we can see different pieces differently. And we can kind of see that, maybe you disagree with these people on this thing, but you don't disagree on the other. And so I think there was a kind of those two audiences there. And it was interesting, American Magazine, I think in the Catholic world, is perceived as a pretty kind of liberal Catholic publication. That's probably one of the reasons they let me publish. But I think, and so as a result, like the reactions were, were mixed, right? Like including from more progressive people who were like, what do you mean you're putting a pro-lifer, blah, blah, blah. But then there are also reactions from conservative people who are like, what do you mean you're putting like an active gay person on there, but I think there was also a lot of reaction from both sides saying, I haven't thought of it this way. I didn't actually see that there was a way to kind of fit these things together.
Yeah, let me ask you this, because I'm curious about this, right? So broadly speaking, right, and I'm sure there are specific instances where there are people in those two audiences, let's say, that would defy the average, let's say, but do you find that you are more easily accepted as a pro-lifer in the LGBT gay community, or do you find that you're more accepted as a gay man in the pro-life movement?
I think probably the latter.
Interesting.
I think in part because it's kind of a beggars can't be choosers, right? Like one of those two is ascendant. I mean, I think also, like I want to be clear, like pro-life can totally be separated from religion, right? There's a lot of secular pro-life people out there for whom this is not based on religious values or Christian values kind of at all. And then there's obviously like Muslims and Sikhs and all sorts of, and Jewish people, all sorts of different views. But, in Canada and in the people I've encountered, like most pro-life people have been some version of conservative Christian. And I think that their commitments, often opposed to certain gay rights and gay liberation and kind of towards a more traditional sexual ethic, those are married also generally to like a sense of human dignity, right? So like, I'm thinking of two really good friends of mine in Vancouver who, are very dear to me, and like I've been, I've known them for years before they were married, during their marriage, after, now that they're having kids. I suspect that they disagree with me on gay marriage. Like if they were a legislator and they had to vote on it, they probably would vote no. But like, I think they also have been great friends to me throughout my life, right? And I think, I don't know, I maybe it's just my personality, but I don't know that you need someone to agree with you on everything to have a caring relationship with them, right? And I think in certain ways, kind of Christian organizations at this, or like churches at this time, are really good at instantiating that. If you believe in human dignity, you also believe in the dignity of the people with whom you disagree.
Right.
We live in a world that grows through communication.
Every connection comes from a dream to be heard and realized.
To welcome a better future. What are your dreams?
LaRosse Media will help communicate your vision through our professional video production services and marketing strategies.
Start building connections to your future audience. Visit larossemedia.com
And be sure to check out our extended service options.
Dream, produce, market, succeed with LaRosse Media.
Serving Canada from coast to coast to coast.
So on that vein, or in that vein, how do you think that pro-life Canadians can build this broader coalition that's more open and welcoming and frankly winning, like a winning coalition for these
Yeah,
issues?
I mean, and that's the key, to some extent, that's the key thing, right? Because I think all of us kind of in the pro-life movement think, we look at kind of the statistics and the public opinion. And I mean, I think there's probably, it's not quite as bad a picture as it would be presented on, say, CBC, but like, it's not a good picture for the pro-life movement right now. One thing, that I kind of addressed in the article that I think is like a vein of kind of argument or something that we need to consider as pro-life advocates is like, what is really going on when somebody says that they're pro-choice, right? Like, what are they really, like, what is the real feeling that they have? And in my experience, this isn't universal, but I think most people really don't like abortion if they have to think about it. I think most people hate thinking about it, right? For the first thing. And then when they have to think about it, they are angry that someone made them think about it. But I think that is kind of the reason for that is, and I write about this in the article, is I think that there's a lot in our culture right now. We have this view that we really want to be in total control of our own lives, right? And I think in certain ways that's kind of enforced by, brought about by the sexual revolution, right? Like if you're on contraception, certain forms of contraception are very, very effective, right? And they can help people kind of control their pregnancies. And it's kind of produced this mindset that, an accidental, conception is, unheard of, right? And it's going to knock people's life plans off track. And I think, when I think of people my age and, female friends I have, right? Like people's life plans are deeply important to them and people's sense of kind of control, not just for selfish reasons, but because they want to have a meaningful life. And, also they have obligations to their family and they have obligations, financial obligations, paying rent, this, that, and the other. So I think the kind of this idea that we really need to be in control of the direction our life goes. You think of even the phrase planned parenthood, right? Like it encapsulates that, like the idea of being a parent and it being unplanned, I think is horrifying to a lot of people. And I think that that's really what the pro-choice kind of view comes down to, is that like we need to be in control of our own lives, and we can't have obligations put on us that we didn't completely choose, right? And you might say, oh, well, you chose by having sex. But I think, for a lot of people in their day-to-day experience, they don't experience it that way. They don't think of, oh, well, because I had sex, therefore I'm kind of giving permission for it. And I think the analog in the story of gay people often is like, when I was younger, I did not want to be gay. It wasn't my life plan, right? Like as a teenager, I was kind of like, this is not what I want. This is not the hope. This is, I'm going to have a normal family. I'm gonna, get married, have a few kids, a nice house, kind of contribute meaningfully in that way. And kind of the discovery that, I was gay was a letdown, right? Like it was like, this is not what I want. This is not, I didn't choose this. I don't want this, And I think sometimes when you hear you go back to like the 80s and the 90s, even before that, kind of the gay conversion approach, right, where people like would really seriously harm themselves to try and kind of get rid of, to eliminate this thing, right? It speaks to the fact that for a lot of people, this is like totally unchosen. And I think basically what I'm getting at is being able to experience something that you didn't choose and you don't want necessarily as a blessing, as a good thing, as something that, life can be found here and we can live that unchosen obligation lovingly and well. That's kind of the thing that the pro-life movement needs to speak to, right? That it's possible for something to be a surprise and unwanted and unexpected and unchosen, but still good, right?
Yeah. I think one of the most powerful kind of pro-life ads I've ever seen, it was years and years ago, I think when Obama was president, and I can't remember which pro-life American organization put it out, but it had a picture of an ultrasound, and it was like, this baby will be born to a 17-year-old mother, drug addiction, whatever, single home, no father, whatever. And then it was like, this baby's your president. Because that was Obama's life story, basically.
And that totally makes sense. I'd also be interested to see an ad like that focused not just from the perspective of Obama himself, but from his mother, right?
Yeah.
Like, what was it like to kind of conceive, this baby? Maybe not, I don't know his full family story, but, like kind of unexpectedly, right? Like, or unintentionally.
Yeah.
And then what was it like to make kind of, frankly, like in our culture, what's really a courageous choice, right? Like we want in the long term for it to be a culture where that's the choice that everyone wants to make, like that's what we're aiming for. But right now it's a courageous choice. And I think we almost need to make it the case that like, you don't have to be a massive, courageous hero to do this, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think I respect massive, courageous heroes, but like, I don't, you don't, that's the success of the gay movement. It's made it so that you don't need to be like a really kind of unique person to be able to accept this when it comes to you. You have kind of pictures in your mind of like, okay, this is how I could live a good life, right? And those pictures aren't like fully done in the gay movement, especially not done in the context of like creating traditional or more traditional style families, right? Those are still kind of being developed, and those pictures and that kind of social imaginary isn't quite done yet. But on the pro-life side, I think we also that's one of the things we need to do is like lift up those stories of women who have carried those unplanned pregnancies to term, have welcomed their children into the world, and that they're happy about it, that it's made their life meaningful and good.
That's what I loved so much about Leslyn Lewis. Like when she wrote
get that story. Yeah.
When she wrote her note about, being pregnant and being an articling student and like having friends make abortion appointments for her because they were like, you will never be a successful lawyer if you go through with this, and just having so much pressure and so much coercion, and just talking about like the beauty of having the baby and then going on to start her own law firm and be a successful Bay Street lawyer. Like I just, from just a pro-life perspective, it's a great story. But like, this is someone who is running for leader of the Conservative Party. She is a prominent Canadian politician now. So that is a special type of voice. And I thought that was really powerful. And it speaks to the type of people who supported her. Yes, of course, a ton of SoCons did, but a lot of non-SoCons supported her as well, which is why she did so well originally. So yeah, absolutely, we need to get those stories out.
Yeah, kind of interesting. Sorry, go ahead, Kelden.
Well, I was just going to say one other example that kind of leaps to mind. You still mentioned Barack Obama earlier, but I was also thinking, I remember during the 2008 presidential campaign, Sarah Palin, kind of midway through she was the VP candidate on John McCain's ticket. And it was her daughter who got pregnant.
Right.
Yeah.
And then before that, though, Sarah Palin, as kind of an older mother, had a baby with Down syndrome.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think one of the most like tragic and like saddest and parts of abortion in kind of our society is just the incredibly high rates of abortion when we're talking about, children that are prenatally diagnosed with Down syndrome, right? And I think hearing stories of mothers who, were scared and didn't know what to expect, and this is not what they intended, but then they saw, this is my child, right? And I'm not going to end the life of my child. I'm going to welcome my child, and how that's often become such a source of life and blessing for them. I mean, I think that kind of story is a story that we need to hear more of, right? Like you mentioned, there was I think in France a few years ago, there was an ad campaign from a Down syndrome coalition called Dear Future Mother. And it just featured a bunch of, Down's children, and I've got a cousin with Down syndrome, and she's kind of very like, I don't know, core to my own development of pro-life convictions, right? But seeing the ways in which, in which welcoming that kind of life, even if it's unexpected, it ends up being good, right? And so I think that's the sort of story that if we can find ways to lift those up, that could really get to the heart of, I think, what a lot of pro-choicers are worried about, right? Because you talk to a pro-choicer for long enough, and they're gonna start immediately citing, all the difficulties And for sure, there are difficulties, and I think there's practical work that needs to be done to combat those, right?
Yeah.
But then also kind of at a spiritual level saying, no matter how difficult it gets, it's going to be worth it anyways.
Yeah.
And hearing people kind of articulate that, so that's not, I don't know anybody who would ever carry a baby to term at 17, but really like, actually, you know what? My friend did, or my mom's friend did, and it worked, and she had a good life,
Yeah.
Those examples are important.
Yeah, I think there's two things that you mentioned that I thought to be interesting in there in your remarks a few minutes ago. One of them being, what do pro-choicers really mean when they say they're pro-choice? Because I find that most Canadians are on what's called, what I like to call the pro-life spectrum, right? So they might not be 100% pro-life, but very, very, very few are like Justin Trudeau and a lot of professional conservatives, where they're 100% pro-abortion, through all 9 months of pregnancy, any time for any reason, so as long as you can find a provider. The vast majority of Canadians aren't there. Most Canadians, like when you ask them, like, are you pro-life, pro-choice? They say they're pro-choice, but I like to say they're pro-choice with exceptions, right? So like a good chunk of them are pro-choice in so much that the mother's life is in danger, right? So now you're talking about a minuscule number of abortions, if any, really at all, at any given year, given how much medical technology we have these days in a country like Canada. They would be against sex-selective abortion, massive majorities, late-term abortion, pain capability cutoff for abortion, which is usually around 12, 16 weeks. So I think, again, to use a Venn diagram and analogy, like I think that the middle of that Venn diagram is pretty large, and I think that's a good ground for pro-lifers to start. But another thing that you mentioned that I thought was really interesting is making these choices, making the choice to affirm life for mothers maybe in difficult choices, or for someone like Leslie Lewis who had all this external pressure on her from colleagues, and I can't remember if she said family. I don't think she said family, but most definitely colleagues and friends. That's not nothing for a young woman from an immigrant family trying to be the first in her family to make it on Bay Street as a lawyer, which is not nothing, especially back in the 80s. You look at a country like Hungary and other countries in Central Europe where they have developed there is a role for government to play here, right? So you look at Hungary where they have various tax incentives, or they have actual direct payments to mothers in crisis situations where they're young, where it's like, hey, like, you're pregnant already. Guess what? The tap is turned on to help you out, to help buy, formula, to help buy diapers, to help buy that car seat, to maybe upgrade your car as you continue to have children. Like that doesn't really turn off. It just changes. And in the last 10, 12 years in a place like Hungary, just by doing that, they've been able to reduce their abortion rate by 30%. And on top of that, I know we were talking about this with Ginny Roth last time, they've actually been able to increase the labor participation rate. So women ages 15 to 65 who would normally be working some sort of job, whether it be full-time, part-time, casual, before they brought in these changes, the labor participation rate for women in Hungary was around 50%, maybe just under. Now it's almost 2/3. Now it's almost 66, 67%. And they're having more children at the same time, but they're a lot of times, because they have these government supports, they're what's called like mompreneurs, right?
Yeah, if you have 4 kids in Hungary, you never have to pay income tax again.
as soon as you're pregnant with your fourth, that's it. As a woman, you never pay income tax again. So you can go out and generate whatever type of income for you and your family. That's tax free, at least at the federal level. So I guess it's interesting because these conversations are starting to be had in Canada. I'm starting to hear them from various pro-life federal and provincial politicians. You hear about it a little bit, but less so like in the United States. But it seems like in continental Europe, for right-wing, small C conservative parties, this is something that's advanced. I guess here, like, what I see this discussion, I think like amongst that kind of conservative donor voter universe, like I think that these policies would be embraced, and I think that there may be even an opportunity for those rare kind of big L, big C liberal conservative switch voters in places like the GTA and places like Metro Vancouver. I think that these are policies that would speak to people, even if they only have a couple of kids. I mean, you lived in both places. Alyssa lived in the GTA for a long time. My father-in-law, for example, he drives, pretty much 4 hours every day to commute. And like, if you can have these supports, like, and he's a father of 5, so if you can have these supports to kind of make family life easier, and one to actually have as many kids as you'd like as well, like, I think that would be popular. I'm not saying my father-in-law is a liberal voter by the way, he most definitely is not, but there were people in his kind of situation that are, where he lives in the western part of the GTA. So, but I see that potentially being a battle within Canadian conservatism between actual conservatives, which I think I would describe the three of us being, versus libertarians. And so I guess to kind of ask you, like, where do you think kind of small C right wing, or big C for that matter, conservative parties need to go for things like this? So when you're talking about that courageous choice, it will probably always be a courageous choice, because I mean, a 17-year-old woman that's pregnant, like, that's, a very, very new thing for someone very young, but maybe not as rare of a choice. Like, do you think that there is a role for conservative governments to play in helping these girls out?
Yeah, I mean, I think let's make the child tax credit and the Canada Child Benefit apply at conception.
Yeah.
Right? Let's do things like that. I don't know how you'd work out the mechanics.
Open up an RESP right away, for example.
Totally, right? Like, all these different pieces, make it as easy as possible. I'm thinking, I have 2 other friends in Vancouver that have recently had their first child. And it is difficult, I think. I think it's difficult. They live in a 1-bedroom apartment, right? And, I know they're trying to get co-op housing, right? Because it's Vancouver, so it's so hard to get the right amount of space for children. So I think some of these kind of generally kind of good government things, like fixing the housing crisis, foremost among them, could do a lot. But I also think that, and that's one of the ways in which kind of like, if you get the basics right, like, good things happen. But I think, and then on the specifics, like, yeah, again, like, I'm thinking of a book I read last year that really struck me. It's the book is called Mom Jeans, and like jeans, not the pants you wear, but the like GENES, and it basically just kind of goes through like the science of maternity. And one of the things, there's a chapter on there just about kind of all the research that's been done about how you can make the actual delivery process as non-traumatic as possible, and things like ensuring that there's a private room for the delivery, right? Like at the hospital, or things like ensuring that, there's adequate numbers of midwives and all those pieces, right? And then making sure that like prenatal care, when it's offered, is offered kind of in a respectful, kind of culturally sensitive way, too, because, a lot of the people, the average age of people having, like, women having children are often, more likely to be from cultural backgrounds that are not kind of the majority one in Canada, right? So all these different kind of policy areas, if we get into the nitty gritty of them, I almost wonder if this might be something that RightNow would want to work on, is like, obviously we want law, like legal, limits on abortion, right? Like, that's what we want. But assuming that we can't get those right now, what are the like 25 other policies, like these micro things that we could do that would be pro-life, right? Because I would describe, extending the Canada Child Benefit backwards to, to provide funding for a family and a mother when their child is when they're pregnant. I would describe that as totally pro-life, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And it kind of reframes the debate. So if we couldn't get anything done legally, are there things that we can do that aren't legal, that aren't in the criminal code, but that are still good, right? And yeah, and I just kind of think seeing kind of what happens with that, right? The other thing that kind of struck me, I think some countries have done this kind of thing, and I think it's good, is, we get so much government advertising like all the time. I've never seen a government ad in my life talking about like how it's beautiful to adopt. They don't even need to say abortion is bad. They just need to say, hey, Actually, you know what? I have seen lots of ads in the government. BC would always send me on YouTube like directed gay foster dad ads. Like, hey, do you want to be a foster parent? But there's never any, as far as I know, that are like directed towards like, if you're feeling difficult, like here is a resource for you. In fact, I mean, our current government is attacking resources to women who are in crisis pregnancies, right?
The
so
opposite, yeah.
You don't need to be pro-life in the sense of like actually wanting to, have legal limits on abortion to say, hey, it would be good to ensure that those charitable groups are fully funded and that the government is promoting their work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so that's the sort of thing I could imagine, like avowedly pro-choice conservative MPs in a future government kind of coming out in favor of.
Yeah, Pierre could be the poster child. He was adopted. He
Yeah,
could be the face of the, yeah.
I don't, this is me speculating, but I wonder if, under the surface, there are views that are maybe not the ones he brings to the top because of the politics, but I don't know.
I mean, Lisa McLeod was adopted and has like a very interesting backstory.
Lisa
Ray.
Yeah.
And she was like very vehemently pro-abortion.
So I guess people,
yeah.
can't really predict, but you wonder.
All right, Kelden, we're nearing the end of the interview, so we just want to do a few rapid fire questions if you're up for it.
Totally.
All right, number one, what is your favorite, or who is your favorite Canadian politician, living or dead?
I think that my favorite one is probably John Diefenbaker, right? Like,
good choice.
I don't know. I think big. I mean, you're a Saskatchewan guy, right, Scott?
No, Manitoba. I'm not from the Gap. No,
Same difference.
That's you just swore. Yeah. Watch your mouth.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, I think a lot of things happened to Canada after he left office that were probably taking us down a bad path, and I wonder if he stayed in longer, where we'd be.
Yeah, Keith the Chief's a good choice. Have you ever had a near-death experience on a hike or a camping trip?
Yes, on several occasions.
One or many?
I'd say, I mean, I guess it depends. Like, I remember, I'll just give one example. A few years ago, my buddy and I were hiking up in Kootenay National Park, and we kind of round a bend, and we've been making like the bear kind of scare 'em off noises every now and again, but I guess we'd kind of gotten into a discussion and had not. And like 6 feet away, mother grizzly and 2 cubs, right? So I don't know that it's a near-death experience, but the fact that there were 2 cubs
with her.
That's a near-death experience.
Yeah.
I don't care what happened. Yeah.
But I mean, she just, she looked up at us kind of, and then just decided to her and her cubs walked away.
Thank God.
Yeah. Thank goodness. Right? That was lucky.
Have you ever seen the movie Backcountry?
I have not.
Don't. Don't.
Every now and again, we used to watch the Blair Witch Project before we go on scout trips.
Oh no!
Which is another one you don't want to watch before you go out alone into the woods.
What's your favorite subject to teach, and your favorite or your least favorite subject to teach?
Ooh, that's a good question. I love teaching history. I think it's so fun, and I love hearing, when I taught in BC, I taught grade 5, and the grade 5 BC curriculums are really about Canadian identity, and so I loved, like, I did a whole kind of course on Canadian history, and now I get to teach ancient civilizations and the medieval period to grade 2, so 7-year-olds, and they just go nuts for that, right? Like, we were like reenacting the Battle of Hastings out there on the playground. So
that's amazing.
It's so, and kids get like, kids love that kind of thing. And it's fun to teach it. Least favorite, that's a tough one. I mean, I think, like, a lot of people would say math, but I really like math. It's yeah, I don't know. I'm lucky in that respect. I think probably the one that I find most difficult to teach, especially in Western Canada, is French. I speak French because I did French immersion when I was a kid, and I lived in Ottawa for years. And so the gap between like what I'd like to teach them and what we're able to teach them in the context of like a pretty unilingual West, it's sometimes a little upsetting because you're like, oh no, I wish I could actually teach you something, but it's hard to make it stick, in a core French context, especially,
Yeah,
you gotta move to Eastern Manitoba for that.
I'm sure.
But their French is much more Parisian. No, sorry, that was the last one. Yes. What was the best part of doing your mission trip to Mexico, and what was the hardest part?
I think so. I never did a mission trip to Mexico. I participated in Notre Dame has a they have a Master's of Education program called the Alliance for Catholic Education. It's almost like, you teach for 2 years in kind of an under-resourced Catholic school somewhere, usually in the South, but across the United States. And then you earn a free master's degree from Notre Dame while you're doing it. So if you've got any prospective young Catholic or, teachers, it's a great program. And I loved it. My placement was in Brownsville, Texas, which is just on the border with Mexico. So my students were all Mexican American or Mexican nationals. Some of them would actually cross the border every day. And what I'd say I loved about that was it is such a beautiful familial culture. Like, I mean, I don't know, make America Mexico again. Like, I think Mexican people have a beautiful culture. I'm remembering after I went to a first communion because the parents invited me to, and afterwards the parents invited me out to the table, and there we are all sipping tequila with the parents to celebrate their kids' first communions. Mm-hmm. That is not as common in maybe that kind of Canadian culture. Mm-hmm. But that was just, and I still keep in touch with some of those kids who are now, my first class are going, are graduating high school next year, which is wild. Yeah.
Have you ever had a devil child in your class that made you want to quit?
My first year of teaching was very, very challenging, I'll say. Okay. It's for a lot of people, I think. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a fair description of the child I have in mind. Like, God bless her. And you know what? She came around in the end. By the time I left Texas 2 years later, she, we had a nice farewell with me and the particular kid.
That's good.
Pull out my hair and wonder if I was capable of doing anything at all.
Yeah.
So you were
a very steep learning curve.
Yeah.
That's good to hear. What's your favorite movie?
Oh geez. Do you know the Royal Tenenbaums?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You like quirky kind of indie sort of. Yeah.
Great. One that I think every pro-lifer should watch though is A Hidden Life. I'm sure you two have both watched it. Mm-hmm. That it gives a lot to think about in kind of our time.
Yeah. When people ask me that, I always have a twofold answer, and the answers are totally bizarre. My first is Hot Rod with Andy Samberg.
Still.
And the second is Life is Beautiful, which is similar to Hidden Life, kind of, but both could not be more opposite. Yeah, they're totally. Yeah. I know. Do I like one just for fun?
Yeah.
Is this one of the K-dramas I'm into, or is this something that is supposed to make me seem interesting and thoughtful and spiritual?
I can't lie. It's just what it is.
Well balanced.
Yeah. Which province do you like better, Alberta or BC?
You can't ask me that.
We are. You agreed.
I'm going to dodge that answer by saying my favorite place to hike in the world is the Great Divide Trail. I've hiked most of it now. I'm hiking a segment of it now, and it follows the Alberta-BC border, like the spine of the Rockies, all the way up from the U.S. border up to Kakwa Provincial Park in northern BC. And so I've hiked 800 kilometers of it so far, and I'm about to go hike another 100 next week. So, cool. I love, that's my very favorite part, is crossing back and forth and back and forth and back and forth again and again.
He just is scared because he thinks that if he says BC that he won't be on Jason Kenney's Come to Alberta ads anymore.
Yeah.
I didn't say that. Alberta's great.
Yeah.
What's the most hilarious troll or hate tweet that you've received?
I
know you're very reasonable on Twitter, so I feel like
that would attract that.
But you're just very active, so
X.
Oh yeah, X.
Oh yeah. I don't know. I definitely get criticism every now and again. Who's the most recent one I can think of is a very obnoxious one. It's a gentleman named David Moskrop who wrote a book called Too Dumb for Democracy. And it's an autobiography. I think in his case, but I think he just said something like "Shut up, lol, Kelden," and I was like, "Okay." I mean, but I don't know. I've had much more. So I had a few years ago, I wrote an article about curriculum and about kind of how kids learn, which was probably my most controversial article, more controversial than anything I've written on the pro-life case. But yeah, I mean, I had kind of hate calls coming to my school. I was writing basically saying that the Alberta approach to curriculum is better than the BC approach. And that's one of the many ways in which Alberta actually beats BC. But the Alberta approach to curriculum is really, really good. And the BC one is like stuck, in the 60s, kind of like hippy dippy. It's nuts, and it's going to really affect kids negatively. But people looked me up. They found like where I was teaching, and they called my school.
Oh, no.
So my principal came like rushing up to me. She's like, "Did you write some sort of crazy right wing?" It's like, I mean, I don't think so. And then she read it, and she was like, "Well, I mean, this is basically true."
Yeah.
Like, So I don't know. I think people get really exercised about that.
Yeah, I think I posted your article, even I got from people in the pro-life movement who just like hate the conservatives because of education issues and didn't like how Adriana LaGrange did things or whatever. Just really hate comment on some of the stuff, and I was like, this is wild. And these were teachers in the public system, so
well, don't get me wrong, conservatives like often mess up education, particularly in Ontario, but this particular curriculum was a good one. So
yeah. All right, Kelden, well, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast and giving us your insights. They've been awesome, and we hope to have you back soon.
Thank you for inviting me, and look forward to seeing y'all again at some point in the future. Thanks for all you do.
Thanks so much.
Don't watch Backcountry before you go hiking next week.
Yeah.
I'll avoid that. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Hey, Scott, it was awesome to do this in person. We should do it more often.
I don't think we should.
Did you ever watch Zoom when you were a kid? Do you remember?
Yeah, like all the little kids with like the blue shirts and red shirts, and
and they were like, "Hi, Jen, how's your day?" It was like so manufactured, but I loved that show.
Yeah. Zoom.
www.pbs.org. 02134. Yeah.
There's our age.
On that note, thank you so much for joining us. Make sure that you subscribe to us on YouTube, Rumble, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you listen to podcasts, so that you will be alerted when our new episodes come out. And we'll talk to you again very soon.
Bye for now.
Nature communicates with us in a universal language. The sunrise starts a new day. The sunset marks our accomplishments.
The most beautiful communication is where the speaker and the listener match perfectly and understand the same message.
Your future audience is waiting to hear from you. What message do you need to share?
At LaRosse Media, we fashion beautiful communications through our professional video production services and marketing strategies.
Create your own most beautiful message. Visit larosmedia.com and be sure to check out our extended service options.
Dream, produce, market, succeed with LaRosse Media.
Serving Canada from coast to coast to coast.